We're going to break down this plane crash, and it's a freaking miracle. It's just another miracle for the world to see. But then it becomes a question of, okay, well, why miracle here and then not miracle in other similar situations? I don't know how the cosmos works. I just know miracles when I see them. Let me play the video while our commercial airline pilot guest comes on in. It's so freaking wild. I stitched together the 3 videos that show the timeline here. The only thing we're missing is a video on the plane. And I'm wondering if they didn't know. I'm wondering if they had no idea there was an issue. Let me rephrase. I wonder if there was actually no issue until they hit the ground way too hard. Doesn't look like there's any distress coming in. This is the video, and I don't know, trigger warning. Does anybody need a trigger warning? No, nobody dies, so you can't really have a problem watching this. Miracle. Watch this. Coming in pretty standard, but hot. And man.
Oh, fuck. Oh, fuck. Oh, no.
That is absolutely
you're seeing this airplane
wild. These guys are staying pretty freaking calm.
Oh, my God.
Some people are going to say, dude, call 911 and stop recording.
My God.
But I presume somebody else was on a phone. Wait until you see the dude getting off the plane.
Drop it! Come on!
Give mad credit to those airline stewardesses and staff.
Fuck.
Lots of swear words.
Holy fuck! Holy fuck! Oh my fucking God! Yo, I was just on this fucking plane.
Trying to beep over the swears.
Oh my God.
That thing hits the ground.
We're in Toronto.
We're in Toronto.
We just landed. Our plane crashed.
Our plane crashed.
It's upside down.
It's upside down with a Canadian accent.
Fire department's on site.
Fire department is on site.
We're upside down.
We're upside down. Everybody.
Most people appear to be okay. We're all getting off. Some smoke going on.
Some smoke going on. We're all getting off. So I'm going to keep this in the backdrop just in case we need to come back to it. Cousin Eddie, you want to come on in? Grateful that you are actually coming on such short notice so that we can talk about this. We've done an interview before, but just for those meeting you for the first time, your credentials so that they can take what you say properly.
I'll also preface this. I'm not speaking on behalf of any previous employer or current employer or anybody else. This is just my opinion. Okay. But yeah, my background is 24 years of military flying, multi-engine turboprops, C-130s and King Air, about 3 years now. Almost 3 years of commercial aviation flying for a major airline.
I'm satisfied with your creds, and admittedly, we all have to do it just so that this is not any form of advice, not speaking for or on behalf of anybody. This is your personal opinion based on your quarter century plus of aviation experience. First questions first. The flight is what's it called when it's domestic and a regional plane?
So the reason they call that particular aircraft a regional jet is not because it's domestic or international. It flies in a smaller region, a vernacular that's kind of used to describe the smaller aircraft that feed into the hub and spoke system for the larger aircraft.
Okay.
So that particular aircraft it's a Delta plane, but not. It's run by their subsidiary, which is called a regional airline, which is a much smaller airline in terms of the type of aircraft they fly. They're the smaller airplanes. So that wouldn't have been an actual Delta pilot or flight crew on that plane. They would have, I believe Delta's subsidiary is Envoy. So that would have been operated by Envoy.
Okay, interesting. What type of plane was it?
I believe that was a CRJ.
Okay.
Something. Yeah.
Who manufactures those?
I believe that one is Embraer, I believe. Don't quote me on that.
No, actually, I got Cook up in the background, and I know I got Encryptus in there who can tell me in real time. And by the way, Encryptus has now become a de facto Viva Frei equivalent of Jamie, which is fantastic. CRJ planes, part of the Canadian Regional Jet Series, originally designed and manufactured by Bombardier, a Canadian company. Well, stop blaming. This is one other strike against the argument of blaming Trump. Okay, manufactured by Bombardier, regional plane. So what is it? It's like 2 and 2 aisles down the middle, seats. What? 7?
Yeah. That's what most of them are. They're either 2 on one side, 1 on the other, or 2 and 2 usually. And they feed about 80 people max usually. It's that neighborhood.
I've got so many questions. I don't know where to start with it, but let me pull up the video again because I'd love for this is what people are hypothesizing. There's a number of smart people, not just in our locals community, but also on Twitter at large, who were saying that it didn't do, what was it called, the flare when it came into the
Correct.
ground. Like, so if you're, again, we're not going to hold you to anything. This is, mere observation. Is there anything you
Sure.
notice with this coming in that doesn't
Sure.
look right?
And not the approach necessarily. It didn't. It kind of looks like it picks up vertical descent speed a little bit towards the end, but they could have caught a tailwind, and that might
Yeah.
be doing it. So the winds would have had a lot to do with how this all went down.
Okay.
They did say it was gusty. I did not get to see what runway they were landing and what the winds were at the time of landing. That would be interesting to see if once that comes out. And that will be, again, you can't know all of this stuff until you see the NTSB report, right?
Okay.
Like that's, or in this case, it's going to be the Canadians doing the investigation with FAA's help.
When you say it looks like it gains descent altitude, I mean, it's interesting. It looks like it's right about here where it goes
Yeah.
down quicker than there.
Yeah. So
then
that's what I
bang.
was kind of pointing out. And so let me explain to you what happens when you're landing. And it's generally the same for the vast majority of these aircraft. The altitude at which it starts, the flare maneuver, is different based on weight, type of aircraft, and some other things. So the bigger the airplane, like a 747, it's going to start its flare a little bit earlier than this.
Explain what the flare is for those who don't know.
So the flare maneuver is where we're going to typically pitch the nose of the aircraft up about 2 to 4 degrees from what we were flying the approach at. So the nose of the aircraft is going to come up 2 to 4 degrees, depending on the airplane. Again, I'm speaking in generalities. Okay, if this isn't specific to a CRJ, I've never flown one of those, but most commercial aircraft or jets are very similar in concept of how they're going to land. And there's exceptions, obviously, but so a flare, again, let's go with what the CRJ would probably flare at. In my guess, it's going to flare around 30 to 20 feet is where they would begin their flare maneuver. So that means they're going to increase the pitch, and that is going to allow the aircraft to slow its descent rate, right? And then you're also locking the aircraft in what we call a landing attitude. So there's a certain pitch you want the aircraft, no problem. You want the aircraft at when you touch down, right? And it's got variability in it. You don't have to be perfectly on pitch, but you got a couple of degrees of forgiveness. But basically that's what you're doing is when he's flying down towards the runway at about, again, it's estimation for this aircraft, but about 30 to 20 feet above the runway, he's going to begin that flare. And that's going to allow him to go through something called ground effect, which is where anytime an aircraft is within its wingtip distance. So whatever the length of the wing is, when the aircraft is within that distance to the ground, it picks up greater lift, and that's called ground effect. It's just a something that happens to aircraft. So by setting the pitch attitude and flaring, and then also being within ground effect, that slows the aircraft's descent rate, and then it touches down smoothly, hopefully, and you go on with the landing from there.
So that answers at least my ignorant question. Is like the flaps on the wings; those are just to slow it down once it's already landed, to slow it down quickly.
So no, the reason we put out flaps is we want to have more lift on the wing, and we also want more drag into the slipstream so that the aircraft can fly slower with more maneuverability and not stall. Okay, so the cleaner the wing, meaning less flaps, the faster you have to fly to not stall the airplane. Well, when you're coming into land, we want to be going as slow as we can, or that the airframe design allows for it, right? So that it's easier to land and more controllable, and everything goes better when you're going slower, kind of thing. So we put the flaps out as drag devices and lift devices so that the aircraft will slow down, A, and B, have more lift, but it requires more power also.
Okay,
so that's just
that has then the idea that something was frozen down and locked that didn't, I don't know, slow the plane down enough is not a possibility, or not even applicable.
There are other things that come out that are drag devices, that aren't flaps. We have something called a spoiler. Honestly, I can't tell you 100% that the CRJ has it, but I'd be willing to bet it does. So a spoiler is going to come out of the wing and destroy lift over the wing once you touch down, so that the wings don't continue to try to fly the aircraft off the ground, right? So that spoiler comes out and it makes your brakes more effective because now there's more weight on the landing gear. Does that make sense? Because we're destroying lift over the wing, so now the aircraft's going to settle onto the gear and create more effectiveness for the brakes, okay? So that spoiler, if for some reason that were to deploy early and you were still not on the ground, that would cause something like that.
Oh, okay, that's
It-
interesting.
it-
And I
could do that.
I corrected while you're looking. It says yes, CRJ planes are equipped with spoilers though their specific design and function vary slightly depending on the model. CRJ 100,
Sure.
207. Interesting. So there could have been something that deployed
It's
prematurely that
possible.
pushed it down. Okay.
Now, there's a lot of safety systems that are supposed to prevent that, but airplanes have problems sometimes.
Well, and that was my other question: is in terms of the creating the ground effect and pitching the nose up 2 or 4 degrees. Is that automated or is that
No.
pilot manual?
That's pilot manual. So unless the aircraft has auto land, so the jets I fly, they have auto land. We can just sit there and the plane will land itself and taxi down the runway. But I don't believe any CRJs that I've ever seen have auto land. I'm almost certain of that. But the pilot, yes, always has, unless you're doing an auto land, always has to set the flare. It's a manually done thing. And at the same time that they're flaring, they're reducing power on the aircraft so that it will settle down and touch down. For instance, these are things that cause hard landings that I've seen, and this is just a truth throughout aviation. So if the pilot rapidly reduces the power at too high of an altitude above the ground, he can induce a hard landing because the aircraft slows too rapidly, the lift comes off too quickly, and you get an instantaneous sink rate is what we would call it, or descent rate that goes really high. Even though you might only be at say 20 feet, the sink rate becomes really fast really quickly. And so it'll slam the airplane into the ground and you'll get a hard landing. That's one way to do it.
If I may ask you, is there a technical threshold after which something becomes a technical hard landing?
Yeah, we typically measure it in G-force.
Okay.
So I would say most aircraft, anything above a 2G landing would be considered a hard landing.
Okay. And then anything above that, anything that is called a clinical, call it that, hard landing, runs the risk of breaking landing gear or something like that.
Not at like 2Gs. Like we're concerned with like overall fatigue on the aircraft and straining the metal. So we consider a hard landing something that would have just stressed the Now, to collapse the gear, even on a CRJ, which their gear isn't huge and beefy, don't get me wrong, but to collapse the gear like happened there, they hit hard. That was a very hard landing.
The ground effect is basically compressing the air under the plane so that it sort of like creates a buffer and then makes it thicker so that it's
kind of, yes. And you can feel that as a pilot. You can feel when the aircraft enters ground effect because you've got to relax your back pressure on the yoke just a little bit to kind of go through it. And if you don't have enough descent rate when you do hit ground effect, you'll float, you'll land long, and you potentially will have to go around because you didn't land in time. Right. So it's kind of a balancing act. You got to flare, but not too soon. And you got to pull power, but not too fast. These are all the things that go into how we train pilots. And then these guys have had plenty of training, I guarantee, because in order to fly that aircraft, they have to have a minimum of 1,500 hours, bare minimum. So they've got plenty of experience. Typically, the regional jets have less experienced pilots than, say, the non-regional, the regular Delta pilots, because they get paid less. So that's where you're going to go gain experience. If you're a civilian, you're going to go fly planes like that. So you get enough hours to go work for big Delta or big American,
Jay Ash in our community says, can you get him to describe the slip maneuver? This is used with suspected wind shear.
Technically, you're putting in crosswind correction, not slipping the aircraft, but if you were to look at it letter of the law, I guess you could call it a slip. But typically what's going to happen, you can land a lot of aircraft in a crab. That aircraft did not look like it was slipping, in my opinion, but it could have been. I can't see those controls very close. So, if the video had been tighter up on the control surfaces, I might have been able to tell you that. But a slip is where we're going to put, let's put it this way, I got to explain what wind does to the plane first. So as that plane was coming down to land, if the wind had been coming from the right side of the aircraft would have a tendency to do what we want to call weather vane into the wind. So it always wants to point into the wind. Does that make sense?
Okay, so we're looking at the right-hand side now. If there's a right to left wind, you would see the plane leaning into the wind.
You would see it turned towards the wind until they put in the crosswind correction.
Okay.
So I don't know if you can see my hand, but basically as the plane's coming down, it might do this, and then at the last minute, straight. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's coming in like this, and then it's going to straighten out. And
straighten out when the wheels touch down, or straighten out by virtue of
it will have to straighten out when the wheels touch down if you land in what's called a crab, but you can help the plane not get jerked so hard when it touches down by putting in a crosswind correction. or what the guy was calling a slip. Technically, you could call it that.
Is it powering one engine more than the
No,
other?
no, you wouldn't normally do that. I've never heard of somebody doing it that way. I'm not saying nobody has ever done that way, but no, you put in rudder control and aileron control. So you're going to put the, there we go. So if the wind's coming from my right, I'm going to turn the aircraft into it, wing down, and then I'm going to step on the opposite rudder, so my left rudder, and it's going to turn the nose of the aircraft straight, but keep me tracking down the runway. It's complicated, I know, and without diagrams, it's hard for me to kind of show you what they're doing, but everybody does it, and they would have been completely used to it. And it will, when you do put those crosswind corrections in, it will decrease your lift. So you're ruining some of the lift on the wing. So that would also accelerate your descent rate. If you did it really high, especially, you would have to add power so that your descent rate would not increase too quickly. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So, I mean, I'll bring the video back up one more time and just looking at this. So other than it looks like there's a dip here, it goes down quicker.
Yeah.
Forgive me for the stupid questions.
No.
There's no chance, did it land too early on the runway, or there's nothing on the runway that would, if he lands too early, would cause the wheels to get sheared off?
I mean, if he missed the runway, it would potentially, but no, it looks like he touched down on the runway, in my opinion.
Okay.
And he just hit hard. I mean,
what
real
does
hard.
that feel like? What is that? If you're sitting in your seat, does that break spine? I'm not trying to be funny. Does that herniate discs and like break backs?
Oh, it could. Yeah, it absolutely could. 100% could.
Okay.
Because you're decelerating. The way that aircraft landed, that would be like a car crash at, whatever, let's call it. It looked like his vertical speed increased rapidly. So let's say he was doing, I don't know, when he touched down to collapse that gear, I don't know what it would have been, but probably instantaneous vertical velocity would have been, I don't know, 4,000, 5,000 foot per minute to do that. And so imagine stopping something that's traveling at 4,000 foot per minute, instantaneously. That's a lot of force, right? And if that's what collapsed that gear, almost guaranteed. But,
Okay.
I mean, I don't know until we see the black box. But
and so
looking at it, it looks like a super hard landing that just collapsed the gear.
Hypotheses, would it be a tailwind would be a wind coming from the tail to the front versus a headwind coming from the head to the back? A tailwind would cause the drop more likely than a headwind?
Correct. Because let's say it's a 20 knot, well, they wouldn't land with a 20 knot tailwind. Let's say it was a 10 knot tailwind. Your ground speed over the ground is higher than you want it to necessarily be, because you're getting pushed forward, as opposed to 10 knots of headwind, which is going to slow you down over the ground, right? Your relative ground speed. So that's a problem. And then because it is a tailwind, again, your wings aren't creating quite as much lift because they're not getting the same amount of airflow over them, right? And so you want it, your tendency when you have a tailwind is you want to pull power because you're just screaming over the ground, but you can't, because now you're going to have an insidious sink rate and it's going to cause a hard landing or, some other problems. So
just looking at this is Grok and it's aggregating the information, but it says according to Weather Service Canada, winds were coming from the west at approximately 29 miles an hour, 46 kilometers an hour, with gusts up to 38 miles an hour, 61 kilometers an hour. The conditions were accompanied by blowing snow following a weekend of heavy snowfall. I don't know.
That's pretty significant winds. That's not joke. That's no joke.
Okay, I'm going to go to the chat in a second if I've missed any questions that other people had. But when it starts to roll, again, maybe a stupid question, where is the fuel on that plane?
Fuel in almost every aircraft is stored in the wings. All aircraft store some fuel in the wings. Some aircraft store all their fuel in the wings. It just depends on the aircraft.
Okay, that's very, very interesting, because is that going to be a stupid question again? But I mean, I presume, was that specifically designed for safety? I mean, I presume functionality as well, but I presume in an accident, if the wings shear off, then less stuff to burn the fuselage is the word, or the centerpiece?
Sure. We would call it fuselage. I would say, as I understand it, again, I'm not an aero engineer, but as I understand it, the reason we put fuel in the wings is to prevent them from essentially having to have less lift. Let's see, how do I say that better? So if we don't put enough fuel in the wings, like there's a minimum fuel you can land with for a lot of aircraft, because if you land with less fuel than that, the wings can bend upwards and cause a lot of stress and they can break. So they need that weight of the fuel to kind of hold them down. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I presume it's sort of almost like a stabilizing device. If you put water in something, it becomes much more.
Yeah, you got it.
So these wings shear off as it rolls. It looks like it rolled.
One wing did. Yeah.
Holy shit. And then you see the flame and it burns. That wing is off burning in the distance as the fuselage continues to go forward. I mean, it's amazing. What if another act of God? What do you make of that in terms of a miracle?
It's crazy. Yeah, no, every now and then you see an aircraft accident and people walk away from it and you're like, how did that happen? Because they just don't have any right to be walking. But it happens. And in this case, that wing broke off, they rolled. It's crazy by itself. And then the fact that everybody basically walked away. I mean, there were some injuries, but that was crazy, Viva. And probably most of the injuries happened because somebody wasn't seatbelted in tight, and when they rolled, they probably fell out of their seat.
Well, I mean, first of all, the seatbelts are not exactly like Formula One seatbelts. They don't go; they're just around your freaking waist. You imagine everybody's hanging upside down by their waist on those narrow nylon bands. I mean, that's not comfortable.
No, yeah,
and if there's babies,
they're very lucky. Yeah,
touch mothers holding their babies or something. It's dogs.
Yeah,
holy hell!
Everybody would have felt massive impact when they hit the runway. And then, it would have, been very disconcerting, very disorienting to be rolled upside down like that and come to a screeching halt. That whole thing, when I look at it, is amazing that everybody walked away. And I'm glad they did. And man.
No, and I'll read this from Stephen Britton in our locals community. It says, Viva, please caution everyone to not jump to conclusions. Pilot error is one of many conclusions. Ask if Delta pairs up inexperienced pilots or makes sure at least one has tons of experience. On these regionals, there's still two pilots, correct?
Correct. Okay. There's still two pilots, and there's going to be a captain and a first officer, and the captain's going to be more experienced, and that's why he's the captain.
To state the obvious, the one thing you can tell from the video is it was not a standard smooth landing and then the gear magically or inexplicably crumbling. Correct. It was a hard landing.
Yeah,
and then the only
you can see that clearly.
So it's going to be wind, technical failure, pilot error, or whatever.
Yeah, it could be a combination of 20 things, Viva. It's landing and takeoff are critical phases of the flight. That things happen very rapidly. You have to react very rapidly. And if you don't, or you just didn't see it or didn't anticipate some problem, it can cause issues like this.
No, the possibility
I'm not knocking those pilots in any way, shape, or form. It could have been completely out of their control. I don't know what happened because I haven't got the black box data, the telemetry and everything else. It's just like that Black Hawk crash. I think what I thought was the problem is what I've found now. Basically the Black Hawk had a major piece of safety equipment turned off and it would have prevented that problem. But, I don't know why they had it turned off. I can't tell you that, but they had it turned off. They had their TCAS turned off.
I'll entertain the theory when you're not on camera about the Black Hawk one, which someone sent me before going live today. And I was going to make a joke, like, space lasers pushing the plane down or something, but like, it's freaking amazing. It's amazing as in that's a bona fide miracle that the body doesn't break in half as it rolls. And people say good engineering. I mean, I guess, it withstood, catastrophic failure, which is what you need in Man, Cousin Eddie, thank you very much. I mean, hopefully I don't call you up too often because
hopefully not. No more accidents. We'll keep them out for the year.
Okay, well, I think I got everything. Let me go to locals and just make sure that I didn't miss. If I missed the previous chat, ask him what color the black box is. Says the answer.
It's orange. Yeah, they're not black. I don't know why we call them black boxes. They're orange, like neon orange.
I don't think. And everybody giving the kid a hard time for blaspheming and using God's name, the Lord's name. Come on, man. The kid just got the kid's a kid, and holy crap! Like people walk away from car crashes and you're like, I can't believe I was just in that. How much does it? Well, I'll Google it. How much does a CRJ weigh? Like, how much do these planes weigh? How much?
Oh, CRJ probably tips in around 80,000 pounds, would be my guess.
Let's see if you're right.
Right in that neighborhood.
Well, it's in kilograms, and I'm not doing any. No, it's. Let's see here. It looks like some of them are 60. Yeah, 80, the CRJ 900, 85,000 pounds, 84,005. Some of the smaller ones, 72. CRJ 100, 53,000 pounds. Holy crab apples! And there was like probably a totally normal flight until that moment.
Probably it happens that fast sometimes. And there had to have been more than just one thing that caused that. I have a hard time believing just one issue caused that hard of a landing. I think that when the report comes out, you're going to find that it was multi-factored and kind of complicated, and the pilots just either couldn't react in time or didn't react in time. They may not have been physically capable of reacting in time, depending on what happened and what went wrong. And so I don't want to beat up the pilots because, any given day it could happen to even the most experienced guys. And to go back to that guy's question, yes, Delta recruits inexperienced pilots, but into Envoy, right? Delta does not recruit inexperienced pilots. Envoy does. They're going to take the newer guys because they pay less and they're flying a much smaller airplane. That's where they build experience. So technically, anytime you're on a commercial carrier, if you're on a regional jet, so one of these CRJs or the smaller jets, even if it says American, Delta, United, whatever on the side, that's not a United, Delta, or American crew. It's an Envoy, a PSA, or I can't remember what United's called.
No, don't worry about that. It's
Whatever.
good enough. And the question that I believe I've answered is, people say it flew from America, airspace controlled by NAVCAN. It's not FAA over Canada. In terms of who bears responsibility if the plane should not have landed in those conditions, would that be air traffic control or would that be pilot?
Unless the pilot wasn't informed of the actual conditions, it's on the pilots.
Okay, so if they're saying these are the conditions, pilot says, I don't like it, I'm going to fly to another airport and land there.
The captain has all the prerogative in the world for safety of flight to do whatever he needs to safely land that aircraft.
All right, that's amazing.
But again, I'm not blaming the
No. It was just a question of who has the what's the word I'm looking for? The final
authority.
Word. Yeah, because if say, well, ATC, shouldn't have told them to land, but I'm just wondering who's got the final say. Ultimately, it's the pilot who's the captain of the ship.
That's the
80,000 flying ship.
Yes, it's always the captain always reserves the right to do what he thinks is necessary to safely land the aircraft. And it wouldn't matter if, there could be a situation where air traffic control says you're not cleared to land. And he says, I am landing because I can't go around. I have to land. I don't have any other choice. So, whatever, I'm landing. The emergency authority of the captain. Okay, well, he's going to have some explaining to do, but he has the authority to do it. So that's just the way it goes.
Svi Hansis in our locals community says, ask him if it is likely to be an instrumental or visual landing.
That would, from the weather I saw in the videos, that was a visual landing. Okay. Yeah. And even if it was instrument, at some point, again, unless it's an auto land. So there are aircraft that are certified so that the pilots cannot see the ground at all. And the aircraft can land by itself. We're monitoring things, right? But it can land and then taxi down the center line of the runway and stop itself. Okay. But short of that, all other landings that happen and the pilots are at controls, at some point you have to take over visually. You have to be able to see the runway, center line, lighting, and see it to land. Does that make sense?
Yes. Cousin Eddie, hopefully we don't talk about this anytime soon, but thank you tremendously for coming on and sure, enlightening us, because these are, I don't think I've missed any questions, and this has been fascinating.
Well, glad to help.
All right, man. We'll see you in locals.
All right. Thanks, Riva. Have a good day.